Welcome once again to Worship at Home with Pastors Bruce and Judy. I'm Pastor Judy.
I'm Pastor Bruce.
And we are delighted to have you join us for this Father's Day weekend. We're already to the third weekend in June. And today, Pastor Bruce, lots of people are bantering and talking about justice. They want to be treated fairly. And it's a wonderful ideal, because remember in kindergarten when we were learning, you know, keep your hands to yourself, share your toys, you take the pail for a while and then you share it with me for a while, Stephen.
And you knew when other kids were being favored over you, or you weren't getting equal treatment, even as a kid you knew that.
You knew that,
Didn't feel good.
And then remember yelling at your mom, "Mom, it's not fair."
Yeah, and she'd say, "Well, life isn't fair."
Your mom must have known my mom. What is fairness? How do we really know what is fair?
Yeah. I mean, because there's just plain old equal treatment, right?
But that's not always fair either.
Well, it can appear fair on the surface, right? But you have all these variables that come to any situation. You have two completely different people with different backgrounds, and they have different sets of expectations and different needs, and so it's not as plain and black and white as we would like to think that equal treatment and fairness is just given, right?
Yeah.
So it can be a bit of a landmine, and some people might think, well, I need a little more fairness than you because you've had so many advantages in life, and yada, yada, yada. So,
and the Old Testament said eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
It said that so that you wouldn't go beyond in retribution what you had received in hurt, right? That was a very important principle, because I don't know about you, if someone strikes me on the right cheek, I want to punch their teeth out. It's way over proportionate.
Right.
Yeah.
And for us as fallible human beings, so difficult. Well, Pastor Bruce today is going to be, his sermon is titled, Find the Mercy and Justice You Need. And it's from Matthew chapter 12, verses 9 to 21.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I would, go off the rails in my behavior, and I knew I was in trouble when my dad would kind of get on to me, because mom was always getting on to me, so it's like, okay. But when dad
when it was that serious.
Yes. Now I remember, and it's always a fraught experience to share something of your bad behavior when you're a kid, but here goes. When I was a kid, I remember sitting at the dinner table, and all five of us were sitting around the table, as I think all five of us. So mom, dad, my sister, older sister, myself, and my younger brother. My younger brother's 5 years younger than me, and sometimes he could just be a pest. So, and he was being a pest to me at the dinner table. Now, so I, without even thinking what I was doing, I uttered an expletive toward my brother.
Whoops, at the dinner table?
At the dinner table.
In front of your mother?
In front of my mother and my father.
Oh, gosh.
Now, when I said it, I was like, oh, yikes. But I remember looking at my dad, and my dad. Now, my dad could cuss up a storm. He could cuss a sailor blue. But I looked at my dad, and he was just like looking at me like, what?
Did that just come out of your mouth?
Yeah, and I got to tell you, but that was it. That stern look, and I knew that was it. But it was yes, a stern look, but it was also mercy, because he could have grabbed me by the
You could have gone to bed with no supper.
Boy, or a lot worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what for me that happened is it was one of the instances that helped to translate or help me understand mercy. Because I didn't get what I deserved, because I think probably Mom and Dad knew my brother was being a pest and was bothering me, and I was just frustrated, but they had mercy on me, right? We're all, in a way, in the same boat, aren't we? We need mercy, which, if you want to define mercy in a real simple way, it's not getting what you deserve, right? And we need justice, which, if you want to think about it in a simple way, is kind of like righteous and fair dealing. Right?
Things being made right.
After
a wrong has been
done. And not only for others, from others towards you, but from God towards you, right? I mean, you must have justice in this world in order to live, and not only receive it but also give it, right? That's just how relationships work. Well, let me ask you this. Where can you find mercy and justice? Where are you going to find it? Are you going to find it in the law system? Are you going to find it on social media? Are you going to find it within your work relationships? Where are you going to find it? This is what I think. Jesus gives mercy and justice, the mercy and justice you need. Yeah, so go to Him. And this is what I hope by the end of our time, is that you will share Jesus's big heart, right? Because that's what mercy is based on. Just like Dad had a big heart toward me, Jesus also has a big heart toward me and toward other people, gives us the mercy that we need. And so Jesus, in our scripture today, Jesus met the deepest needs of the hurting. So here we are in Matthew chapter 12, and beginning in verse 9, where Matthew is telling us this story. Matthew, now remember Matthew, he's a tax collector. And being a tax collector in the ancient day, and especially among an oppressed people by a foreign power, it was not an easy run for him. I mean, and so when Jesus had mercy on Matthew and called him to be a disciple and follow him, Matthew understood what mercy felt like, didn't he? Yeah. And so he's highlighted, and it caught Matthew's attention, he's highlighted Jesus' compassion, right? Jesus has lots of compassion on people. He also has highlighted Jesus' common sense observance of such things as the Sabbath, where a lot of people would have very strict rules on it, and Jesus, because you don't violate the Sabbath, right? But Jesus was like, wait a second. The Sabbath was made for people. People weren't made for the Sabbath. And so Jesus, he had a real merciful take on the world. And so this tweaked the rule-following Pharisees who, no, we are made for the Sabbath. Pharisees, right? They were the self-appointed lords of the Sabbath, with a little L, Lord, right? They wanted to be in control of it. And Jesus is saying, no, so this is what happened. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, Jesus went into their synagogue, so into their Jewish church back in the day, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. A man with a shriveled hand. Now, we're not really told anything more about him. It could have been that he had a work accident that made his hand and arm paralyzed. It could have been a congenital issue. I remember in a church that I pastored, we had a guy there named Tom who had congenital shriveled arms. I don't know what the term for it is, but they were completely useless. And you just, oh boy, you felt really bad for him, but he just tried to do his best to get along in the world. But this man with the shriveled hand, he would have been in many ways disqualified from much of the religious life of the day because he had this physical impairment, and it was just he needed mercy. And so it goes on, looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So in other words, they were wanting to pick a fight. Okay? The Pharisees asked him, remember the rule followers, those who had already been tweaked by Jesus, looking to pick a fight with Jesus, knowing that in the synagogue, here's Jesus with this man with the shriveled hand. What would Jesus do? So let's poke him a little bit. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Right? What is Sabbath? Well, Sabbath first comes around when God created the earth, right? In 6 days he created the heavens and the earth, and then on the seventh day he rested, he stopped, right? So that became part of the pattern for the people of God. They followed God's pattern. If God rests on the seventh day, we rest on the seventh day. In fact, it became part of the law, right? One of the 10 Commandments is that you will honor the Sabbath every seventh day. In other words, it became one of the primary signs of God's covenant people with that. They were the people who every seventh day would stop. In fact, sometimes Israel's enemies knew that they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath, and so they would attack on the Sabbath because to fight back would be work. So it was a wild thing to trust God when someone's
Sabbath,
attacking your city, right? So anyhow, the Pharisees, in essence, set up Jesus. So they knew that Jesus was full of compassion, that he had a bent to heal any and every disease. They had seen this already out of Jesus. So would he violate the law on the Sabbath in order to help this man, right? So that's the setup. So here's what happened. Jesus said back to them in verses 11 and 12, if any of you has a sheep, okay, now we don't think about it like this, but in the ancient times, a sheep for a person was not only, of course, a living, breathing thing, but it was also currency.
Sure.
That was your livelihood, right? Not only the wool coming off of it, but the meat that would eventually come off, or you could milk the sheep or whatever, right? So if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out, right? Because you'd hear the poor sheep bleeding away, saying, help me, help me. And also you would know if you don't help that sheep, it's going to die, and your source of economics is going to die with it. And so Jesus says, you would save your livelihood. So here's the question, or the statement, how much more valuable is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. See, here's the hypocrisy in the Pharisees. And Jesus knew it, and he's pointing it out. Jesus was saying, you guys would preserve your own livelihood by pulling a sheep out of a pit on the Sabbath day, yet you would deny this man with a shriveled hand from getting back to his livelihood because he was healed on the Sabbath day, and you can't do that, right? So Jesus here, he's Lord of the Sabbath. He's already told us that, right? And I get to make the rules about being Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus corrected the Pharisees' kind of ruthless idea of what God's law, and especially the Sabbath, was all about. There's a way, before we get too harsh on the Pharisees, I got to tell you, there's a way I identify with the Pharisees, right? Because I want things a certain way in the world. And in the world in which I live, I want people to follow God's rules about marriage, about children, about relationships with government, about doing good, about giving, and on and on and on it goes about being holy and righteous. I want everyone to follow that. And I can get, if I'm not careful, old Bruce can get pretty legalistic. I'm a pretty good rule follower, and I can toe the line pretty good until I can't. See, I can't do it perfectly, right? And I know that. But in my legalism, until I bump up against that line that says, gosh, I just can't do this anymore, my legalism is pretty ruthless. It's pretty loveless, and it's ultimately self-hurting, because I just can't live up always to my own standards. But this is what Jesus says to me. He says, you know what? God's laws, what he wants out of us, it's for your good, right? It's to help you receive mercy and offer mercy to people who are in the same pickle as you are in. So Jesus, he then responded further with some what I would call artful boldness. This is what he says in verses 13 and 14. Then he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stretch out your hand." And so he did. And so he stretched it out, and as he did, it was completely restored, just as sound as the other one. So Jesus had mercy on this man, simply speaking a word of healing on this man. Now, I guess technically it was the man who worked, right? He was the one who lifted up his hand as directed by Jesus. But in following and obeying Jesus and receiving Jesus' healing by faith, he received a merciful Sabbath rest for his body and a good future awaiting him, right? Where he's restored to economics, he's restored to the goodwill of his community around him. Sure. He can go back to church, kind of thing. Yeah. Now you can imagine the Pharisees were not pleased. So this is verses 18. But the Pharisees, they went out and they plotted how they might kill Jesus. Yeah. So.
Now wait a minute.
What's that? Verse 14.
Are you going to talk about that some more? I mean, thou shalt not murder.
Yes. Well, that, I know. See, this is the thing. Wait a second. Isn't there another of the 10 Commandments? Okay, the Sabbath, honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. But isn't there another one that says, thou shalt not murder? Because they were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, right? Now they found a reason to kill him. Now, who knows? Maybe they had some weird justifications going on in their mind, but they're talking about murder here. You know, this Sabbath hill that they had climbed up, they were willing to die on. You remember as a kid playing King of the Hill? Did you ever play King of the Hill?
Oh, yeah.
On our way home from school, we had this hill that probably wasn't more than 3 or 4 or 5 feet high, dirt hill. And we would play King of the Hill, and you just battled and fought over being on the top of that hill, and you were kicking and pushing people down and trying to pull others down from the top, right? Sometimes as adults we get up on those hills and we fight and die on those hills, don't we? The Pharisees, the hill they were willing to die on was the Sabbath, right? In fact, so much so they were willing to commit murder to remain king of that hill. But interestingly, Jesus didn't take their bait. And so he chose another hill to die on, which is called Calvary, right? So look what Jesus did. Verses 15 and 16. Aware of the Pharisees' plotting, Jesus withdrew from that place, and many followed him, and he healed all their sick, and warning them not to tell who he was about being the Messiah, at least not yet, right? So Jesus, he is the one who would choose the place and the time of battle And the hill that he would die on would not be here. It would not be now. It would be of his choosing. But when would that be? It would be on a hill outside of Jerusalem called Golgotha. Yeah, where Jesus would choose to die for all humanity on a Roman cross. And it was on that hill that he would bring justice to all people, right? The justice that they need, the mercy that they need to be made right with God, even though they were sinful people and couldn't help themselves. That's the hill Jesus would die on. All this reminded Matthew, as he's writing about this, of Isaiah chapter 42, where Isaiah's writing about God's Messiah servant who would bring justice. In fact, he quotes part of Isaiah 42 here, where he says that Messiah would proclaim justice to the nations, right? That Messiah would lead justice to victory, and in his name the nations would put their hope. This is what Jesus is about. He's not about quibbling over the Sabbath. He is about bringing justice, right dealing with God, being in right relationship with God to all the world, right? And this really matters to us because we serve a Savior with a big heart. He has a big heart for all the world. He loves everyone more than just who we define as being lovable. He defines, because ultimately, could you define yourself as being lovable? You know, you are who you are because of the mercy and justice of God alone, right? Because of His grace, yeah. I got to tell you, in my own walk as a pastor, I have just been learning to, and it's coming out of me more and more naturally, to have a heart that grows bigger and bigger for people, even as my heart grows more discerning, I think, about where people are at. And our hearts should be big as well, shouldn't they? To bring Christ's justice and mercy to the brokenness of people in our lives, our family and our friends and our co-workers. And I got to tell you, friend, Jesus' heart is big for you, and He would love for you to put your faith in Him. So let Jesus' mercy and justice fuel your passion for gospel living. There are a lot of potential battlefields today, or hills that we want to go die over, right? And we have to be careful that we're choosing the right hills to battle over, and it's always the right hill to battle over for the souls and the conversions of people to Jesus. And in today's world, we develop relationships so slowly, don't we? But that's one of the battles that I think we need to fight is just the fight for good relationships with people that are there for the long run and that we hold on to. Who would you shut out of God's mercy? You know, I don't want to be the one to have to decide that, right? All people need God's mercy, they need God's justice, they need to be restored. So would you do this? Would you pray for God to use you to show mercy and justice to a broken person? This week, would you look for one gospel opportunity and ask Jesus to help you show mercy to someone who needs it? We here at the Friends Church, we're all about trying to figure out how to show the mercy and justice of Jesus to all people. And we want you to join us.
Yeah.